A very warm welcome to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone based upon the time zone you are in. I'm Rohan Modi from TUMIVolt, and welcome to today's session on TUMIVolt Charging Station webinar. I'd like to inform you that this webinar series is being organized as a part of the global project called TUMIVolt Urban Mobility through Renewable Energies, and it is being funded by the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, Germany. A quick glance through to the session's house rules. So we will request all the participants to keep your camera and microphones off when the speakers are speaking. We'll encourage you, everyone, to please type in your questions and queries in the chat box, and we'll be happy to take these questions at the end of the session during the Q&A session. I'd also like to inform you that the presentation is being recorded and will be further disseminated in form of video and also PDF presentation through the TUMI website, as well as through the YouTube channels. And the agenda for today's session will be, we'll introduce the speaker, then we'll move to the expert presentation, and finally the Q&A session at the end. So the topic of today's session is the V2G revolution using electric vehicles for energy storage. And we are very happy to have Mr. Sjoerd Moorman, who works as a strategic advisor with EVConsult here. A very warm welcome to Sjoerd.
Thank you very much, Rohan.
Yes. So Sjoerd works at EVConsult as a strategic advisor and project manager, and he has been working on diverse electric mobility projects, topics like EV strategy and roadmaps, fleet transition plans, V2G and smart charging. He is committed to working for a sustainable future and has been actively involved in the topic of e-mobility since 2012, when he built and raced a world champion solar car in Australia. Further, in 2017, he had also set up the world's first online university program on electric cars, which attracted around 150,000 learners from worldwide. Over the years, he has presented in multiple events and on the topic of transition to e-mobility with a link to sustainable energy. Again, a warm welcome to Sjoerd.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yes. And the moderators of today's session will be myself. I'm Rohan. I work as an advisor with the TUMIVolt, and my colleague Marvin Stoles. He'll be co-moderating the session together with me. Marvin works as a transport policy advisor, again with the TUMIVolt GIZ. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the screen to Sjoerd. Sjoerd, the screen is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Rohan. Thank you for the kind introduction. And yeah, hello to everyone. I'm very happy to be here and to share with you some insights around vehicle to grid. So I'm guessing that this session is actually the first bidirectional charging station, because we're going to talk about bidirectional charging, or vehicle to grid, or vehicle to anything, where electric cars or other types of vehicles are able to feed power back into the grid. And that's really going to be a revolution. And I would like to, in the next half hour or so, talk you through some elements around that. So yeah, a little bit about me. Ron already mentioned it, but since 2012, I've been involved in electric mobility, since designing and building and racing this solar-powered electric car and driving through Australia. And ever since, I've been on a mission to get everybody in the whole world to drive on the power of sun and other renewables, and linking the worlds of energy and mobility. And for me, smart charging and smart coupling of these electric vehicles to the grid through vehicle to grid, which is the most advanced form of that, is a big part of that. So I'm very happy to be here. Yeah, my name is not the easiest. It's Sjoerd Moorman. It's a very Dutch name. And I represent a company called EVConsult, and we are based in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. Very briefly, but about our team, now over 10 years of experience around e-mobility and charging infrastructure. That's really where our specialty lies, around the charging infrastructure as well. Started with the helping the city of Amsterdam with the first part of their public charging network, and now we've done over 500 e-mobility projects in the Netherlands, in Europe, but also worldwide, which I will show in a bit. Our clients really range the spectrum of government to the energy world, for example, Singapore Power, Con Edison in New York, but also UK Power Networks in London. On the automotive side, Volkswagen, Mitsubishi, Land Rover, but as well delivery services and other types of organizations, and international organizations and government-related institutes. So really a broad spectrum, and really happy to be working with these companies and organizations. And always the overarching goal is to accelerate the transition to clean mobility. And we do this, like I said, across the world. The main focus is for us is the Netherlands and Europe, but also internationally. So really combining that expertise that we have as the Netherlands of being a front runner, one of the front runners in e-mobility, but also bridging that to other experiences across the world in different countries, and there's really value in that exchange and sharing what works somewhere and what might work somewhere else in a different way. So, for example, one of the projects that we are just finishing now is a roadmap for Morocco, what they need to do or can do to accelerate the adoption of electric cars, and as well different other projects. Around vehicle to grid or vehicle to X, I'll be using that term a bit broadly. So it's about bidirectional charging or vehicle to grid, a car or vehicle that's able to provide power back to your home, to a building, or the electricity grid. So I call it vehicle to X, so vehicle to anything. So the vehicle can provide power to basically anything. It can even be when you go camping and you want to use some electricity from your vehicle. And we've done multiple studies back already in 2017-18, mapping the whole world of vehicle to grid, what was happening at the time, and as well the different projects, but also barriers. Multiple pilot projects in the Netherlands and as well in Belgium, really testing the technology, so the cars and the chargers, but with real users, and using it for different types of energy services, different ways in which the electric vehicles can support the grid. So this is just a selection of the experience that we have, but as well more desktop-based studies into the business case or more policy, sometimes also more policy-related items. Just very briefly about e-mobility in the Netherlands, what we see is a really big growth expected in the next 10 years to by a factor of 10. So going from roughly 2.5% of cars on roads being electric to 25%. So a quarter of the cars on the roads will probably be electric cars. So that's a really big increase, which will have an impact and an effect on the electricity grid. And it can be, on the one side, it can be a threat, but it can be a huge opportunity as well if we do that, if we manage that in a smart way. And that's really where vehicle to grid comes in. Because when all in 2030, when all this amount of electric cars will be there, they will add another energy demand similar to the Netherlands, to the European grid. So that's really, really big, but that presents at the same time a really big opportunity. And part of this presentation as well is that is that we believe that we're moving into the decade of vehicle to X or vehicle to grid scale up. So similar to 10 years ago, people didn't really talk about electric cars much, or really know what it meant, or what it looked like. And I think we're going to see something similar with vehicle to grid. So now electric cars and electric mobility in a broader sense is part of conversation. People have seen them driving around. Maybe you've already driven one or charged even an electric car. And I think a similar thing will happen with vehicle to grid. So it's becoming part of our conversation, and of course within the broader context of a smart integration and smart charging of these electric vehicles, and linking them to clean and green renewable energy. And so why do we believe that this is the case? Is because of our collaboration with many partners and in these pilot projects, that we see that the technology works and we're moving towards in universal standards, that there is a large business potential and social impact. And as well on the chargers side, we see that they were really large, the size of a refrigerator, a big refrigerator, and now they've become small, efficient, and compact, and more user-friendly, and very importantly, a lot less expensive. There's still a way to go there, but costs have really come down a lot, and they are projected to come down even further. And linked to that, we see the development of attractive and customer propositions as well. At the end of my presentation, I will give an example of that. And with vehicle to grid, we can provide different types of energy services between and different types of revenues, from smaller ones by doing some trading on the energy market, to larger ones up to even hundreds, and even in some unique cases thousands of euros per vehicle per year. Now that's a special case in Denmark, where there's a lot of wind power, and the cars can really help a lot with managing those fluctuations on the electricity grid. But we definitely see other examples as well. For example, in the UK, where they really see hundreds of euros that can be earned with vehicle to grid by using these cars, these big batteries on wheels, for energy services. And we see collaboration. We see people coming together, whether it's companies, also governments, more people working together and seeing the potential that this can have on the transition towards clean energy and mobility. Now, what will I discuss with you today? I will briefly run through these topics. So what is vehicle to grid and what are its benefits, the use cases and applications. I'll show several projects around the globe, the services and the readiness level, something about the V2G architecture and the challenges to adoption, and some requirements, both for the power grid as well on the asset level, and finally a roadmap to V2G and how it can be implemented in a country. All right, let's dive in. Just to start as well, what we've made over the years is also a website with lots of information on vehicle to grid. Is the V2GHub.com, together with several partners. So there's lots of information there, and I'll also use this throughout the presentation, because we have a goal as a company as well to spread the knowledge, because we believe that it helps with speeding up the transition. So I use this from the website. So what is vehicle to grid? I've mentioned it before, but in the broadest term, it's about vehicles that can as big batteries on wheels that can be used as energy storage. whether it's for your home or for an office or for your city or even for the whole country. And in that way, we can help support the grid and as well make driving electric cheaper, because we can earn a little bit of money by doing these energy services, and that way electric mobility becomes more affordable. There are several other benefits. So there is that revenue side that I was talking about, but as well resilience. So having a, for example, electric car, there's a lot of energy stored in just one electric car, because you can sort of power your house for about a week. If you have a full battery. So if there would be a case, or like in cases or countries where there's maybe a hurricane or something else, that you can use the car to as a backup power. So that really adds resilience to the system, next to balancing these fluctuating and intermittent renewable energy sources. Building on that, you have the self-sufficiency, so people being able to store their self-generated solar power in their car and use it in the evening. And in a broader sense, that adds to the benefit to society. And when you're really doing smart control of your car battery, and not doing dumb charging, so really plugging it in at maximum power and charging it up to full as quickly as possible, but doing that smarter and even slower at certain times is even good for the energy, good for the battery, because you're doing more enhanced battery management. So just to give a few examples of V2G around the world. So again, you can find this map on the website that I showed before, and I'll just run through a couple projects. And you see worldwide that there's roughly 100 vehicle-to-grid projects that we've mapped, but there might already be more because it's growing really quickly. The first one is Japan. This is a company location at the Mitsubishi headquarters. And I'm starting with Japan because this is really one of the birth countries of vehicle-to-grid. Because when they had the tsunami disaster as well, the government in Japan said, okay, we need this technology. We need these electric cars to be able to support our country in case of emergency. So there was really a strong push to develop this technology. So already between 2012 and 2015-16, they've implemented vehicle-to-grid, for example, in this office location in Japan, with multiple cars linked to solar power. And by doing that, being able to add electric cars to the building and chargers, and a lot of them, plus solar power, without the need for a much bigger grid connection. So that's really a way to save and prevent this big investment that you would otherwise need in a bigger grid connection, by doing this smart management of electric cars, solar power, and there was also a stationary battery in this system. So really a combination of that smart shifting around of energy storage. So we call that time shifting, and this emergency backup, which is very important for Japan. Moving to the Netherlands, here in Amsterdam, actually, where with shared electric cars and real users, we trialed distribution system services. So really supporting the local voltage grid and congestion problems, because we see so many more appliances, including electric cars, that are putting a stress on the low voltage grids, that we need some form of flexibility in storage to help manage that and prevent that congestion. So that's what we did. This was in 2018. And special here was the use of shared cars as well. Moving to a whole other side of the world, Hawaii, where around 70 private cars of users were being used and tested, and really trying the different services. And there's a special case as well because, of course, they are islands, and they realize the potential as well to put solar power there. But when you're such a small island, then these big peaks of solar power and as well of electric vehicle charging really have a big impact on your electricity grid. So what they did is test vehicle to grid, how that could help with solve those problems. And an example of the UK, different type of vehicle. So these are buses, around 30 electric buses that are being used to support the grid, and so really helping with keeping the national grid stable by providing frequency response services. Now, I will not go into the detail of explaining what that exactly is, but it's another form of keeping our grid stable, which is very necessary. Otherwise, we create blackouts. And you see here that the beneficiaries are as well the grid operator, but as well the fleet owner of those buses. Another example of the Netherlands, because I think it's a nice showcase. This is our football stadium in Amsterdam, and here as well you see that by combining vehicle to grid with solar panels and a big battery, they are preventing big peaks on the local grid there. So the grid operator in the Amsterdam region is very happy that the big peaks that are there when there is a football match are managed, are much lower because of this smart system. So a little bit more about the types of vehicle to grid services. So basically there's roughly two types, and one is behind the meter, so providing energy to your home or to the building, or on the other side, providing power directly to the grid. And within that, you have the different types of services that I've just shown you as well in the different project examples. Talking about the readiness of those services, you can map that by saying something about the service readiness level. We already mapped that in 2018, and I've updated that picture a bit, and for the different types of services. And really the main takeaway here is that we've researched it, we've tested it, it's proven, and it's really becoming commercial now. There are still barriers, but we're moving into a commercial application, and not just for one type of service, but for all of them. Talking about the architecture of vehicle to grid, and as well a bit about the challenges to adoption. So to be able to do vehicle to grid is not enough just to buy a special charger, a charging pole or charging station. You really need a lot of different elements to work together. So you need a special V2G charge point or bidirectional charge point, but as well a electric car that can do that. So it needs to have a special plug and standard that can do that. Currently, it's possible with the Japanese charging standard, and it's now in progress. I'll refer to that in a bit, to implement that for the European plug, the CCS charging plug that we have. But apart from that, you need the connection to the utilities and to the energy markets, and to have that connection, that's usually done through an operator or aggregator platform that combines all these smaller assets, not just one car, but multiple electric cars or other types of assets, heat pumps, batteries, and links them all together and couples them to the utilities and the markets. And of course, to make it interesting and workable as well for the user, you need a user interface, an easy user interface, for example, in the form of an app or something in your car, where you can see what's happening and where you can also, as a user, control to some degree what's happening. And so you need all these elements, and you need them to work together. And that is also really one of the biggest challenges that is there, that you need all these elements and all these different parties that need to work together to make this happen. Luckily, we see this being implemented, and there's already, well, for example, mainly in Europe, there's many companies that are involved in this and are working together, first in pilot projects and then moving towards more commercial propositions. And one example that I wanted to show as well is the national grid operators, so the high voltage grid operators. The Dutch one, which is also partly in Germany, Tenet, they are called. They started this crowd balancing platform. So really a universal way for these organizations and companies to work together and exchange information and data about this smart energy and about signals that are being sent to an electric car somewhere in the country and saying, okay, please provide us some power. And they're doing that with a blockchain platform. So this is something they launched in 2020, early 2020, and they're working together with a lot of companies and organizations to implement this. And I just wanted to show this example of the way forward, and as well innovative and visionary thinking in terms of how we can set this up and how we can collaborate. Some detail about the requirements on a power grid level. So we need this sort of open data and digitalization. That's really important. As well, the markets are not structured really well for smaller assets like electric cars, which are much smaller, of course, in terms of the power that they can give, compared to in what's currently maybe a gas power plant that is providing stability to the grid. So we need a change in the flexibility in energy markets. In the local grids, we see that there is currently no markets and no prices, but they are slowly opening up, and you really need those markets and prices to be able to get some revenue and then get a business model to provide as well support to local grids. And interconnection standards and processes, so it's more of a grid operator thing. This they also need to be adapted to link those new types of chargers to the grid. And another one on the market side is time of use tariffs, which really help with putting a price on flexibility and on moments where the grid needs support, or where there's a lot of green energy available. And yeah, I'll keep this one brief because I already mentioned, I think, most of it. On an asset level, you need a car that can do vehicle to grid. Unfortunately, now it's mostly the Japanese cars that can do it, but not many of the rest. But that's underway. You need the special charger, and you need the link to the energy management system and to the energy markets. And I'm coming to the conclusion of nearing the conclusion of my presentation. But really the last bit is about a roadmap to implementing V2G in a country. And what we see as EVConsult in many projects, it's most of the time it's really 3 phases. So it starts with charging, getting chargers at all, and electric cars. That's really the first step. And then you're thinking about smart charging, being able to put more chargers on the existing grid connection and preventing overload. And then the next step is thinking about bidirectional or vehicle-to-grid charging. So this is really the multiple steps that you see, whether it's at a company location or it might be at your home, but as well on a much bigger scale in a country. So the three main steps here are to enable e-mobility and charging, and then through smart charging minimize the cost, and then through bidirectional charging really tap into those different value pools, and by doing that as well you're helping with integration of renewable energy and with the whole energy transition. I mentioned this before as well, the standards, it's a bit of a technical detail, but it's very, very important because as a country you can make many plans, but in this case you are dependent on these charging standards, which are made by many companies, the car companies, as well energy companies, and they work together to make these standards. So this is, for example, the European one being developed, where we see bidirectional charging in level 3 being developed now and being implemented now, and really full bidirectional, like vehicle to grid charging around 2025. So that's really the last step in this roadmap. So I've been waiting several years for this, and it's good to see now finally this standards being developed. And furthermore, so what we see in terms of how it develops in a country is from technological demonstration to commercial scale-up into mainstream adoption, and that can be for electric buses or at homes, company fleets, and public chargers. And I just wanted to finish off with two examples of countries that are now in this commercial scale-up phase. So, for example, in the UK, we see this commercial proposition. So it's really already implemented for customers. People can opt for this proposition and say, I want this V2G charger with a Nissan Leaf, and then every month you can get a cashback on your lease. And in terms of the future vision, they expect in their scenarios by the national grid operator that it might be in 2050 that 50%, around 50% of households will provide vehicle to grid services. And another example, the Netherlands, our home base, where you have the largest bidirectional charging plaza near Utrecht, and in the city of Utrecht, around close to 500 now public V2G chargers in the city of Utrecht, and more to come. So you really see that this is being scaled up. Yes, it's new. Yes, it's challenging, but it's being scaled up. And that's a good thing because it helps us pave the way to the road towards renewable energy. And I'm happy to see this development and to explain in a brief presentation about vehicle to grid. And I thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sjoerd. Indeed, and quite interesting presentation. And thank you for summing it up so concisely, just in time, considering the topic range and the complexity of the topic which we had today. But yes, and I myself have few questions for you, but I already see some questions coming up from our participants. So maybe it's the right time for me to hand it over to Marvin. Marvin, Would you mind?
Sure. Thank you very much, Rohan, and of course, thank you, Sjoerd, for this really excellent presentation. On point, and I think it was perfect in terms of giving a broad overview for our participants who have not been involved to vehicle to grid before, but also gave us some new things to think about and ask you now. And this is the right timing, because I will moderate the Q&A session of this webinar, and we have already some questions in the chat. And maybe we just start with the first one from Jonas Röllin. He's asking, what's the minimum size of the power grid for a V2G application?
Yeah, well, thanks, and happy to see several questions come in regarding this one. So it depends on exactly maybe what you're asking, but if you're talking about the power grid and really the national grid, for a vehicle to grid to provide flexibility and services to that, we've seen over the last years already that these amounts have been lowered. So it used to be around 1 megawatt, so that's really big, because an average charger may be 10 kilowatts. So there's a factor of 100, so you need at least 100 cars to be able to enter that market, and those 100 cars would need to be connected all the time. And we've already seen in Europe that that amount is lowered. So it's made 10 times as small, so 0.1 megawatt, and that's really underway now, where multiple countries are working together to make that amount smaller. So to conclude, it's not possible with just one car and one charger to be connected to the main energy markets directly. But through aggregators, so what I mentioned before as well, those companies that link together cars and batteries and smart heat pumps and all types of flexibility, you can enter into providing energy services into the grid.
Excellent, thank you very much. And this brings me to the second question from Michael, who's asking, how do you see the role of battery swapping coming up of this technology in a V2G world?
That's it's also a very interesting question. I think battery swapping technology within the EV world, the electric mobility world, is already a very interesting question. We see that making a bit of a comeback. There's the Chinese manufacturer NIO that are seriously investing in battery swapping. So we thought for several years that it wouldn't really take off and it wouldn't work, but it seems to be making a bit of a comeback. In terms of vehicle to grid, for sure, if you would have batteries being taken out of a vehicle, and maybe they are and they are stored somewhere, and the vehicle gets a new battery in, then at that location you would have several of these batteries there stored and waiting and charging. So that could be a way to link those batteries to the grid. I'm not sure if you would really call it vehicle to grid then, because they are not in the car anymore. But that could definitely be an interesting model. But yeah, this is really an uncertain thing to see what battery swapping, what the effect is going to be on e-mobility.
Yes, thank you very much. And there's a second question also from Michael, more directed to the context which we work in, which is mainly developing countries and emerging economies. So he's asking what key issues should be considered in those contexts when shaping the framework for e-mobility.
Yeah, interesting question. So I didn't show it as an example, but there is a project, for example, in a V2G project in Namibia, where they're already, I think it's at one of the UN offices. I don't know it exactly by heart, but so it's already underway. It's already being implemented, so it is possible. But one of the main things, or several of the main things, would be that first of all, you need vehicles that can do it. So right now we are really limited to the Japanese vehicles. So you need those Japanese vehicles with the Japanese CHAdeMO charging standard. And only then with those types of vehicles you can do this at the moment. So that's a really important part. Apart from that, as well, in many of those countries, the energy system is not as open, so it's more integrated compared to maybe, for example, European countries. So there would need to be some change there as well to be more open and to be more, let's say, market oriented. Of course, still fitted to the local context, but more that there would be the creation of flexibility markets, because without those, you cannot provide power back to the grid and then get rewarded. So that's really another key element that you need there. But happy to continue as well this conversation in more detail at a later stage. Thank you.
That's sure thing, and I believe also the question of grid services can also be, or the potentials can actually be bigger in developing countries, as we have in many cases a huge potential of renewables on the one hand, but in some cases the electricity grids are not as stable as maybe in some of the European countries. That's also, I see also huge potential of this technology in the e-mobility arena, generally speaking. So coming to the next question from our colleague from GIZ India, she's asking, apart from vehicle to grid, which other vehicle to X application has gained more traction among the projects implemented across the globe? Do you have any examples for that?
Yeah, I think I would say, well, it's not that there is one sort of clear use case that's really a front runner. That's also why I gave multiple examples. But one, well, a few to mention really are that behind the meter, so at office locations with fleets, and preferably the fleets that have regular driving patterns. So maybe they are company cars and every day they get back at 5 p.m. and then from 5 p.m. until 7 a.m. the next morning, that time window they are able to provide services. So that's really where you see where there's also skill and a controlled fleet. So really see that, and there's also a good business case. So really that's one of the applications which gained a lot of traction. And the other one that's maybe good to mention is slightly similar, but it is the example of the buses. So I've shown the one in the UK, but there's also several projects in the US of electric buses being used for vehicle to grid services. So I think it's good to mention that one as well, and especially since buses are often one of the leading types of vehicles within the e-mobility transition. So for many countries that are still fairly new to e-mobility, I think implementing vehicle to X or vehicle to grid on the buses makes a lot of sense. So it's good to therefore mention that application once more.
Interesting, especially when I think about your nice pyramid of dump charging at the bottom, smart charging at the second level, and then vehicle to grid charging on a third level. And this really connects nicely to the idea, I think, of converting bus fleets to electric bus systems. Maybe providers should look into that technology then, of course, if they have the capacity in the future more. But there's a follow-up question also regarding the charging speed and how vehicle to grid is connected to that. So is slow charging actually more convenient for vehicle-to-grid applications than fast charging?
Yeah, I'm happy as well with this question, because it's something that I haven't touched upon, but yeah, it makes more sense to do vehicle to grid on slow chargers. So that's really what you see happening. Fast chargers, usually if you are driving an electric car and you're using a fast charger, you're stopping and you want to get on the road as quickly as possible. So there is not really that flexibility. So in those use cases, it wouldn't make too much sense. But this is another aspect. It's not really vehicle to grid, but if it would be a location with multiple fast chargers with a battery there at that location, then of course that battery could provide energy services, but then it wouldn't be vehicle to grid, of course. But yeah, vehicle to grid is really something you do where a car is parked for a longer time.
Yeah, it makes absolutely sense. And I see Rohan has also raised his hand, I think, to also propose a question to you. Please go ahead, Rohan.
Yes. My question would be, I have two questions, maybe very short. So the first question is on the business side of the V2G. You mentioned that, or in fact, in your use cases, I saw most of the beneficiaries were the local DSOs, right? And then there was a slide wherein you showed the architecture and you showed the operator or the aggregator platform. Now, when most of the time DSOs will be the beneficiary. Do you see that DSOs are should come up in this business operators and aggregator business while it's benefiting them in a big way, or is it already happening here in Europe or maybe in Japan, or the 50 projects which you researched on? So is DSO coming up in this role? Is my first question, and my second question is we see the V2G projects, prototype projects coming up from 2015, but in your one slide you showed that the main the mainstream adoption will be only maybe after 2025. So what are the challenges? 10 years is a big time, especially when we talk about Agenda 2030 and Paris Agreement. So where do you see the challenge? Is it OEMs or is it regulatory preparedness which we are lagging in?
Okay, thank you as well. Let me start with your first question around the DSOs. So typically, in terms of use cases, we've in the early phases we've seen more other types of applications or use cases than the DSO one. So we more the national grid services where there's already markets, they were already there, they were further developed, and there was more value in them. So that was one that was more developed and behind the meter as well, where there's a better business case. And the DSO is basically in the middle, and we see that was lagging behind a bit, but they're making it as well sort of a comeback, or they're realizing the value there. They have a lot of challenges coming to them, not just electric cars, but as well heat pumps and many different things, and even finding the people to strengthen, to really strengthen the local grids. So they have a lot of challenges, but they do see this as an opportunity, and they're entering the stage, and they're working together, doing pilots and working together with these types of aggregator companies. It might even be that they have a more close collaboration with aggregators, or that they create markets where multiple aggregators can provide multiple types of services. And regarding your second question about the rollout and the uptake of vehicle to grid, and well, Of course, the years that I put in the presentation, we don't know yet for sure. It might be optimistic. I'm a bit of a believer in in e-mobility and vehicle to grid. But based on the experience of the last years, I think that sort of that uptake is fairly reasonable. What we see, several of the challenges that remain, I touched upon several of them in my presentation as well. One to mention is the standardization. It's if you don't have any electric, or if you have so few electric cars that can do vehicle to grid, it's really difficult. So that is of course on the supply side, but you also have to also look at the demand side. So it needs to be that customers, companies, cities ask for vehicle to grid. So that is also why I mentioned the example of the city of Utrecht, where they said, okay, we want vehicle to grid for our public charging network. Even though today there's not that many cars that can provide those services, we believe that in the next years those cars will be there, and we need that to support our sustainable energy strategy as a city. So that is one thing that needs to change, that needs to happen. So we are also, as EVConsult, working together with cities to do these preparations. And of course, always the business case with any new innovative thing, the business case is always difficult because it's still fairly expensive. We've seen the first vehicle to grid chargers that were 10,000 euros or more, now coming down to below 5,000 euros per bidirectional charger, and really coming down quickly. So we see depending on a specific case and use case and many factors, of course, but we see that business case arise somewhere between next year and 2025, and then it will start growing more. So I think just those would be several of the main things that I see that are still challenges for that uptake of vehicle to grid.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sjoerd. And with that, I would also like to go to the next question, which is again a technical one. And our colleague again from GIZ India asks if the adoption of V2G strategies cause premature degradation of the batteries. What's your answer to that?
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question, one that I get a lot. So what you have to, so there is an effect of battery degradation by doing V2G. It depends on the type of service that you do, but there's been a lot of research on this, and as well in different pilot projects, and as well car manufacturers have tested this, and basically the conclusion is that if you compare it to other things that degrade the battery of an electric car, vehicle to grid is very small. So the biggest thing that degrades the battery is simply time. So this is not something that a lot of people know, but just having the battery there for several years degrades the battery. So that's the biggest one. The second one is driving, and then the next one would be vehicle to grid, and that depends on the service that you implement, how big that effect is. If you're using a lot of energy every day of discharging it and charging it, then it has a big effect. But if you're providing, for example, these frequency services that are very small fluctuations, and you're keeping the state of charge of the battery within a small bandwidth, then that's actually better for the battery than being fully charged for the whole night.
Interesting. Nice to know that, of course, especially for potential EV drivers here in this group, or people working on the matter, also of course on e-buses, etc., as some of us do. I don't know, I don't see any further questions in the chat. If there's no more question, maybe I would have a last one from my side as well, which would go in the direction of how the whole V2G technology might evolve. I have the feeling that there's a lot of potential in this technology, but sometimes Rohan also mentioned it. I get the feeling, at least in Germany, maybe coming from the utility side of things, the interest to really roll it out in big scale is not there yet, and it might be even suppressed a little bit. Can you think of a scenario where V2G will not be successful, or do you say it's a no-brainer, it will come because otherwise we just don't use this potential for renewable energy and e-mobility in the transport sector, and making this link between energy and transport, which is so much needed for decarbonization?
Yeah, okay, well, thanks. I think that's a very interesting question to finish with, a broad one. I fully believe that at least smart charging will be the baseline that we will move towards. Vehicle to grid, in all honesty, of course, is uncertain, you know, whether it will be a success and when exactly. The only real big scenario that I see that would mean that vehicle to grid would not become, you know, a significant part of e-mobility is if we would move very, very quickly towards autonomous cars. So if these cars would be autonomous and would be driving basically all day and with a very high utilization rates, they would require only fast charging, and then vehicle to grid would yeah, you wouldn't have so much slow charging, so vehicle to grid would be smaller. But then again, during the night, these cars would be parked anyways because there's not much mobility during the night. So for me personally, I do still feel that vehicle to grid will be implemented, and in a way is almost unavoidable. But it's a question, how big is that share going to be? Is it going to be 50% of cars and households, or is it going to be 30 or 80? So I think it's mainly that question.
Perfect. I think that's a very encouraging outlook. And with that, I would like to close this Q&A session and hand back over to Rohan to close the whole of the session of the webinar. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you, Marvin, and thank you, Sjoerd. Indeed, very insightful presentation and engaging Q&A. Personally, I'm taking back quite some insights with me after this session. So I would really like to appreciate again, Sjoerd, for your time. It does take efforts for coming in here and sharing your views with the participants. I'm sure our participants would have enjoyed it here as well. We already see some applauses. So thank you very much, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for everyone for joining. And I think, as you've noticed, I enjoy talking about e-mobility and vehicle to grid. So if anybody would like to continue the conversation, then feel free to contact me. And thanks very much for this opportunity to speak here at the TUMIVolt Charging Station. Very happy to participate, and thanks to you both, Rohan and Marvin.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much, Sjoerd, and bye-bye, everyone.